So now that we've got our cool stain graphic in the back, it's time to move on to the finishing process. You may notice we've got a little bit of a change of scenery. It's temporary. Let me show you the reason why we did that. It's a paint booth. Yeah, that's exciting. So we're going to be making use of that pretty soon, but for now, it's occupying the space that, well, I would normally occupy. So there's a new location right behind me, just for this one episode, hopefully. I guess we'll see. Let's talk about what we're going to be using for this real quick, and then we'll get to it. We've talked about tung oil before. You guys know how much I love it. It gives a really nice color, a decent protective finish. It's very easy to apply. Just generally, it looks awesome and it's fun to work with. So what we're going to do here is start off with our naphtha, which is basically a cleaning agent. Can be used as a thinner in some rare circumstances. And we're going to take a shop towel and just give this whole guitar a wipe down. It's got a little bit of residual dust in it, most likely. Shouldn't be any real chemical stuff on there, but yeah, we're just going to take that and clean off, particularly this top. And you know, naphtha is actually a good way to kind of see what wood will look like with a clear finish on it too. If you wet it down with this stuff, you can start to get a bit of a hint of how the grain's going to pop, but there's really no need for me to show you that because I'm going to be putting a finish on it in a matter of mere moments. I struggled with that a little bit. Now, I did some stain graphics on the back, as you already know. Those have had a few days to dry now, so I'm not worried about using this on them when I get to that. I'm just gonna be gentle. You also can use naphtha, and probably should. It's one of the best choices, in my opinion, to clean your fretboards. So we'll give that a quick once over, even though it's not particularly dirty. And then when the time comes, we can put our protective finish on there or just oil them up. All right, moving on. Now, as always, and I know hopefully you guys aren't getting sick of hearing this, but just in case you didn't know, the naphtha that I'm using here comes from Bellin. Great company. They sent it to me for free, so I really appreciate that. Did that so that I could use it in my videos. I kind of requested it specifically, and if you want some of it, it's available in the description on my Amazon page. So yeah, I can go right over my graphics here with this, get everything nice and cleaned up, and not have to worry. Now, when I go to apply my tung oil, which I'm going to be doing in, like I said, a mere matter of moments here, I'm going to do a couple different application methods for various parts of the guitar. So, for starters, I'm going to work on the back, and for that, I'm going to use full strength tung oil, unthinned. There's a little bit of texture back here because it's mahogany and I don't want to grain fill it. I've already done my stain graphics and everything. I don't want to seal it. I just want to be able to go at it straight with the oil. So I'm going to apply the oil full strength using a foam brush. All right. So we'll bring you in closer and you can see how that's done. I'm just going to use a coffee cup as usual to hold the oil because, as you can probably tell, all these boxes behind me, well, I got lots of coffee cups. That's what a lot of them are. You all wonder why I love coffee so much. Anyway, can you get some oil in here? I'm going to put a fair bit in here because I'm going to do the whole guitar. A little bit later when I go to do the front, my first coat on that, my first few coats, probably all of them, will be thinned slightly so that I can really get it to soak into that spalted maple top. But for now, I'm looking for a little bit more filling capability. So I'm just going to use my brush and put on a thicker coat right on the back here. The neck is also going to get that thin down coat because I want it very minimal. I want just a light layer on there to keep the grain from, to protect the wood and keep me from feeling any grain when I'm playing. And I'm going to do the same for the fretboard later. I'm going to thin it down to fully 50%, and that's what I'm going to use to protect and oil the fretboard, as you guys have seen me do recently. So let's get you in here, get started on this. Like I said, I'm brushing this on at full strength, and you'll see that I'm brushing it actually quite a bit. There are a lot of finishes out there that you need to avoid over brushing. You need to avoid going over many times. This is not one of them. This oil, you can kind of just work in there. If you're using a heavily polymerized tongue oil, then you could run into some issues with overbrushing, but generally it's not an issue with oil. It's more of something that happens with a fast drying finish like a lacquer. So with this stuff, you can really just kind of keep pushing, work it into the pores, and go from there. And that same concept applies when you're wiping it on, which is what I'm doing for the neck here, because I want to make sure that it's nice and thin. That's a slightly different concept than I was going for with the body, where I was trying to get a slightly thicker layer on there to get a little bit more filling power. But in this case, I'm just wiping on a very thin layer because I want to make sure that that finish on the neck is thin and stays, fairly matte, doesn't get too glossy, doesn't cause my hand to stick or hang up on that shine that sometimes you get when you're using a full gloss neck finish. Now, for anyone who hasn't been keeping up with this series, this is not the first video in the series, so make sure you go back and check out the other ones if you haven't seen them already. Here I am buffing the oil off of the back of the guitar now. You let it sit for about 15 minutes and then you buff off the excess, and you end up with kind of this nice patina, satiny sheen. And you build this up over several coats. Oil is a bit of a patient finish in that it's going to take you a few coats and some time to really get it up to a beautiful gloss. There are ways to kind of speed things up, but to start with, this is usually the way to go, and it's especially effective if you're going for kind of this more satiny shine and not quite a full gloss finish. It also doesn't have really much in the way of filling capabilities, so sometimes it's worthwhile to combine it with another finish, and you will see me do that in the next video in the series, where I combine this with another finish because the spalted maple is quite porous. I'm also going to use this, as I said, thin down to 50% to go ahead and put a nice little coat of it on the fretboard, get it hydrated, get it sealed and protected for future, and really just make it look much nicer. There are many different products that you can use on fretboards. I'm not saying that one is right and one is not. The tongue oil is among my favorites, if not my favorite to use, but there are definitely a lot of other options out there. In case anybody wasn't aware at this point, you can pick up one of these guitars if you want. There is a link in the description. It helps me out if you grab one through there, but either way, if you go to Solo Music Gear, they're the ones who supplied this. It's a great kit. I'm very happy with it. So check those out if you're interested in grabbing one. Take a look at the link in the description and you can get one through there. Here I am putting the coat on the front. It's very much the same concept, except I'm using the cloth in this case, and I've got it thinned down slightly. The reason I'm doing that is I really want to make sure for that more porous spalted wood that the oil kind of soaks in on the first couple coats, and then we build up from there. Here I am sanding it with 600 grit paper. I've left it 24 hours prior to this point. I'm in a different location now, but you let it dry for 24 hours and then you go ahead and sand it. And I've decided I want to darken things up a little bit. So what I've just done there is added into my somewhat thinned oil a bit of powdered aniline dye, and more specifically Bellin's American Walnut powdered aniline dye, which really tends to mix into pretty much anything, and that's why I can use it in this oil relatively effectively. It's a fairly subtle look, but it gives it a little bit of ambering, darkens it up. It's a reddish brown, this particular tint, so I've basically just made it so that I get a slightly darker, slightly more embellished green pattern when I do this, because everything is kind of brought out that little bit more from adding a very thin transparent layer of this brown on top. Again, it is very subtle, and it's something that I've deliberately kept kind of to a minimum in this first coat just to kind of see how it turns out. I'm pretty happy with how it went, but there wasn't a whole lot of effect to it, so you'll see in my next coat I mix in a slightly heavier dye base. In other words, I just add a little bit more, and I don't thin the next one because I'm starting to build up a thicker layer. So this is what this next coat, the second coat, looks like prior to me buffing off the excess. You'll see some areas are dry, some are wet. That's due to the porosity of the wood. I get some stuff soaking in, but some also sits on the surface. Go ahead and buff off that excess after 15 minutes like I said before, You do that on the entire guitar, so one side at a time generally, and then you end up with back to this satin patina type look. Nice classy shine to it, but again, this oil doesn't have all that much filling power, so we're going to come back in the next video. We're going to give it a little bit more uniformity to the top and quite a bit more gloss. So here I am, like I said, doing that next mix that involves probably easily double the amount of the dye because I want slightly more of an effect, and it just darkens things up a little bit more. You can see when I wipe it on and it gets a little thicker in some areas before I spread it out that it's actually got a substantial amount of that reddish brown in there. The thing is, when we apply these oil coats, they go on so thin that that effect stays very subtle regardless. So it gives us a lot of control, and in essence we're going to have to build up quite a few coats anyway, so there you go. You can kind of start to see that tint starting to build up, and if I wanted to keep darkening this, I could just keep mixing that into my subsequent coats. I don't end up doing that because I actually really like the hue that I've ended up with after this particular coat, and because what I intend to do to the face of the guitar, the front here, to gloss it up a bit and make it more uniform, that will add a little bit of ambering to it as well, so I don't really have to worry about that issue from here on. And that essentially covers the process. You just go back and forth between adding a thin coat of oil, letting it dry for 24 hours, sanding it lightly with 600 grit, and starting over, not forgetting to let it dry for those 15 minutes during a coat, and then buffing everything off. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to tune in for the next one where we do our finishing on the front. I will see you next time.